Today I am going to be talking about the 5 things that we did when Tessie was still a tiny baby when we began to suspect that she was autistic. In a lot of ways it was a sort of frustrating time because I felt really confident that she was on the spectrum, and because there was no way she was going to be actually diagnosed until she was 18 months, because that is the youngest age that they diagnose kids here in the US, at least at this point in time. We knew we were going to be waiting for basically 18 months because we had really strong suspicions pretty much from the time she was born. The first thing that we did when we had concerns was we spoke with our pediatrician. She was very supportive. With our family history of developmental delays and autism, she knew that there was also a good chance at this point that Tessie was going to be autistic, especially as she was missing more and more milestones. The one big thing that her pediatrician did right away was make a referral to a pediatric neurologist. That for us ended up being a really important thing because the neurologist was the one who caught something else that was going on with her, which was that she had central apnea and that her brain wasn't telling her to keep breathing while she was asleep. But at that point it was still very early. And so I think it was so early that no one really thought to make a referral to early on. And so that is going to be number 2. We actually ended up self-referring to our state's early intervention program. And it really helped that we were already sort of in the swing of things with James at that point. He got physical therapy and other early intervention services from Early On, which is Michigan's early intervention program. And so the early interventionists were in our house and they noticed that Tessie wasn't hitting milestones when she was at like 1 and 2 months. And so it was sometime around 2 months that they made the appointment. It was around 3 months old when she actually started receiving services from early intervention. And that's because when babies are really small, they don't have to miss that many milestones to be 20% behind. She needed to have a 20% delay to qualify for services, and she had a really big delay because basically she just laid there and she didn't do anything. It was concerning to everyone. She didn't respond to sounds. Basically, they went home from the appointment and said either she has a really big hearing impairment or she has a really big learning delay. I wasn't really worried about her hearing just because, again, our family history sort of pointed more towards a learning delay, and also she had already passed that hearing test at the hospital. So my second recommendation is that if you start to have those questions, if something's going on, if maybe something isn't typical, that you refer, if you can self-refer, or ask your doctor to make a referral to your state's early intervention for an evaluation. Honestly, one of the things that was so helpful was that they were just really good. Number one, they tend to be really good at just supporting families, but they also teach you things like how to play with your child and just ways that you can help them learn and interact with them. And so early intervention is just extremely valuable. Those programs are so helpful. The number 3 point I'm going to touch on, I mentioned it sort of in the last one, and that is to have a hearing check and an eyesight check just to make sure that that isn't the problem. That was something that early intervention suggested right away. I think they were actually the first ones to suggest it, that when they did the testing and it came out as her having a really big delay for her age, their first suggestion was we need to have her hearing tested and we need to have her sight tested just to make sure that that isn't the reason that she has these delays, because those could be things that could be causing her not to respond. That is number 3 for figuring out what is going on if you suspect something is not typical with your child. The 4th thing I did was reach out to basically all the connections that I had in the autism community, and I asked basically everyone with any experience what they would do if they were in my shoes. What would you do if you had a 2-month-old and you were 100% certain that they were autistic? What would you do? I wanted to help her communicate, and I kept thinking back to the times when Maggie was so frustrated as a toddler, and I wanted to avoid that. I didn't want Tessie to go through the same frustrations that Maggie had gone through when she couldn't communicate with us. We didn't understand her, and we were all really frustrated. That was, for all of us, that was really the hardest time, but I think especially for her, she was just so frustrated because she had so much going on in her head and so many sensory problems, and we just didn't get it. And I wanted to do everything that I could from the time Tessie was tiny to make sure that she didn't go through that we had everything exactly as good as it could be for her. I reached out everywhere, and the autism lab that we had worked with when I had done a study and a training with Maggie, and basically that training was training me how to play with her, with a lot of like getting down and imitating her, and how to interact with her and encourage her to interact with me, basically. And that imitation was just huge, because when I started imitating Maggie, she started imitating me. But back to the point. So we had this contact at the autism lab, and we reached out to them, and something they suggested was maybe getting involved with some of the autism studies that were for infants. And these studies weren't studies where she would be doing any sort of testing that like took her blood or anything like that. These were studies where they watched her do things, like they watched her sit up, or they watched her reach for a spoon, or they watched her play. It's that sort of thing. She was always having fun and enjoying herself and getting a new toy or getting a new book. We picked 3 studies that looked like the most promising. I will tell you that I had some additional motivation when I got involved with these studies, and I found out that they would be doing other tests, that they would be doing an ADOS to confirm a diagnosis or to make a diagnosis, because a lot of these studies were like with younger siblings of kids who were autistic, and so they would be doing a lot of autism testing as we went along to see if it looked like these younger siblings were on the spectrum and to see how they were doing developmentally. I wanted that information. I wanted to have that information so that I could give it to the social workers that we were working with Maggie, and so that I could really expedite the diagnosis. I got involved with the 3 studies that I thought would be of greatest benefit to Tessie for her to be diagnosed as early as possible, and so that I could have all of the information about where she was developmentally. And we picked one that was at Boston Children's Hospital with Boston University and Harvard, and it was helpful because Paul is from Massachusetts, so we could go out there and it would be a vacation where we'd visit family, have fun, see everybody, and also do this one thing for a few hours while we were there. We picked one that has since been canceled at Washington University that was doing MRIs, not sedated, just while the baby slept, which was definitely a challenge, but she did it for our first visit at least. And then we did one that was an online study with Pittsburgh University and the baby lab, which you can do online. You have like Skype or FaceTime, and then we used the information that we had to push for testing as early as possible. Number 5 would be to get on the wait list for testing as early as possible. I thought when I was getting on the wait list when Tessie was 16 months old that I was doing a really good job, that I was signing up really early. When we signed Maggie up for the ADOS, they called us and made an appointment for 2 weeks later, and we got right in. Tessie was going to be tested at the same place. I just thought that it was going to be the same way. It wasn't. I called in October. They told me their next available appointment was in August 2018, and I felt like I had screwed up so much. And I called probably every other week just to check in and see if they had an opening, if they had a cancellation. And in February, they opened up more appointments and they got us in. I can be very persistent. Always be polite and nice, just be persistent and keep asking, especially if they say it's okay. They said it was okay to call and check and see. And it was the time that I did call with the results from Boston when they said, okay, we'll get her in. And they got her in that February, which was exactly a month after we got the results from Boston. And they told us that she was on the spectrum. I have one bonus point, and that is if your doctors think that it's possible, if your doctors think that the insurance will pay for it, genetic testing. Genetic testing with Tessie was a little bit mixed. I'm not sure that I would recommend it, but I think that if we hadn't done it, I would still be wondering. So I guess for the way that I think that I would do it again. And so I guess if you have a mind that's going to wonder about it, then go for it. If you're going to wonder if that's a cause or about future kids, then genetic testing might be the way to go. Maggie had already had genetic testing and it didn't show anything at all. Tessie had genetic testing 2 years later. She had full exome sequencing, and the full exome sequencing showed that I have 2 genetic mutations and that Paul has 1 genetic mutation, and that the genetic mutation that we both have is the same. I have a dominant genetic mutation, and then we both have the same autosomal recessive mutation, and it's like a 1 in 100,000 chance that I would have it and the variation that I have, and it's a 1 in 10,000 chance that Paul would have the variation that he has. He's from Massachusetts, I'm from California. The chances of us meeting and both having this mutation was really, really slim. But I think it's probably played a role in the family that we have, and I wouldn't change a thing. In some ways, the genetic testing definitely did make things scarier, because with Tessie's breathing problems, there were questions about whether that gene was related to her breathing problems and how serious that was, and it was an unknown variant. And so it did make for a scary time. And the other gene that Tessie and I both have that's dominant is supposed to mean that we have a 99% chance of having bone tumors, but we don't. So sometimes it's not right. So those are the 5 things that I did when I began to suspect that our infant was on the autism spectrum. I hope this video helps you. If you like this video, we'd love it if you'd give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in all things autism, we'd love it if you'd hit subscribe. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.